Hello everyone and welcome back to the Global Business Podcast Show. I'm your host Mark Philpott, and on the show I get to speak to business people across the world about our challenging times, and our aim is to share, motivate, inspire and educate each other on how we can deal with things in the current business environment. And on today's show I have another exciting guest joining me. He's coming all the way from Australia, so let's get over now and meet my guest for today. So it's a very warm welcome to the Global Business Podcast today to Mr. Tim Gardner. Tim, how are you, mate?
I'm pretty good, Mark, and I'm a little bit jealous of that intro. Warm welcome. I'm down here in Melbourne, and I've got two flights that I've booked up to Queensland, which have now had to be cancelled because of what's going around, obviously.
Yes, we're living in, let's say challenging times for the least in terms of travel and a whole lot of other things. And one thing that doesn't change up here in Queensland is the weather. So we've got another perfect day here in Queensland. So the quicker you can get up here, the better for your soul, I reckon.
Yes, just hoping I can get out of Melbourne. I really enjoy coming to Queensland, especially during the winters. That's when it's at its nicest, I think.
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, it's great you're on the show with us today because you're going to be talking about your business activities. And as I said to you before we started recording, the show's aim is to really just share ideas and what people are doing through these crazy times so we can help each other. And there might be somebody listening on the other side of the world who picks up on an idea that you share today and it can actually help them save their business. So that's what we're all about. So I'm excited to get into it. Now, tell us, what do you actually do for a living, Tim?
Oh, I'm going to be a bit cheeky and say for a living, I eat, breathe, and sleep to stay alive. but that first thing I mentioned, eat, is pretty much where we're in. We're in food tech. So we've got a startup called Algae, and this has been spun out of research from the University of Queensland. Basically, in a nutshell, we're putting algae into food. Arguably, algae is one of the most sustainable sources of food there is, and I think this crazy world we're in right now has really exposed some of the weaknesses in the food supply chain. So hopefully, we can use algae to plug some of those gaps and get people staying on healthy, nutritious food and not panic buy, and then you end up eating garbage. It's amazing seeing the supermarkets. I'm not sure, Mark, on a boat out off the coast of Queensland, how often you go to supermarkets, but it's been really amazing to survey supermarket shelves and see what stock has been taken down here in Melbourne. All the pasta and rice is gone, all the staples, and it really goes to show what a system we've got that can collapse relatively easily with all this just-in-time supply. I heard down here actually the Coles cold chain distribution centre, they had a couple of cases with this virus there, and because they can't distribute fresh fruit and vegetables, there's a few Coles supermarkets that run out of stock.
Wow.
So it's interesting how it's evolving, but geez, we're lucky in Australia, and we really take food for granted here. I mean, we produce enough food in Australia for 60 million people, but if you're like Singapore, for example, you import tons of food. Hong Kong is only 3% food secure, so 97% of their food is imported. Very similar in other countries where they don't have abundance of resources to grow anything, like the Middle East, where they've got water shortages and whatnot. So we're really lucky down here in Australia. We take it for granted, and I tell you what, food is very important for societal stability. You've only got to look back at the last financial crisis. Leading up to that, the price of oil went to $150 a barrel, but you look at the price of wheat, and food is very linked to the price of oil, because you've got when you're producing food, a lot of inputs like don't just need diesel to run your tractors for your farm, but also synthetic fertilizers rely on the price of oil. So price of oil goes up, food prices go up, and then you get conflict, which is what happened in Egypt and all across Middle East, North Africa. You had a lot of revolutions. So it's very interesting, the price of food. Another example recently, actually, I backpacked from Cairo to Cape Town a few years ago, and I spent a couple of months in Sudan, and I've got lots of friends there still. And over last Christmas, I think it was, I'm losing my timeline at the moment because everything's a bit of a blur given the times we're in. But inflation went up, food prices went up, and then people get angry. If you're hungry, you get upset, you get angry. I'm sure people are familiar with the amalgamation of hungry and angry, hangry. And if you're hangry, you want to fight and let out some steam, and that can turn into violence and revolutions, which is what happened in Sudan recently. And the president got ousted, and well, I just hope that doesn't kind of keep going with the rest of the way the world is right now with food, because it seems some countries are bringing food off the export market to feed domestic supply, because that's what gives you stability across society is people that get their basic needs met. And yeah, is what it is, and we'll try and use algae to solve a few of those problems, so we can keep it on as humans.
That sounds really exciting, what you've started to talk about there. I'm sure a lot of listeners would be interested to know a little bit more about this whole algae into food. Can you give us a description a bit more about how that's actually being done?
People might be familiar with similar microalgae at the moment, spirulina and chlorella. They've had the most market acceptance. We're working on a different algae, which is high in omega-3. 4 out of 5 people are deficient in omega-3 fatty acids. And if you really want to look after your health, you've got to make sure you're getting the right amount of omega-3 in your system, because it's just linked. I liken omega-3 oil to like a high performance oil for a race engine. You want to make sure you're getting the best inputs, so you can be a high performing human being. So omega-3 is linked to a whole range of health benefits, from cardiovascular health, eye health, joint health. And in an aging society, an aging population, it's probably the best intervention you can have.
How long have you been working on this project for, Tim?
Almost coming up 2 years. So this started from University of Queensland. Like I said before, they've got an accelerator incubator program, iLab, which is now morphed into UQ Ventures. But it was a different format. And then April last year, we went to Hong Kong. There's another accelerator, Brink, and they're very interested in food tech and food startups. I think the big buzz last year was Beyond Meat IPO'd, and then it returned 7x in the next few weeks. So everybody got very interested in food and ag tech, and there's been a rush. You might be across it a little bit with a lot of these plant-based meat companies springing up. I think there's something like 700 or 800 of them now.
Right.
But again, you're using terrestrial crops like your pea protein or your soy protein, and you come up with the same restrictions with resources, so land and water. But with algae protein, you can grow a lot with less resources.
Yeah, interesting. So coming into 2020, in terms of the business plan and the vision, and I'm talking about obviously before COVID-19 took over the world, how was the business tracking then? What was the vision for 2020? What were you going to do with the business?
what we're doing, it's a little bit deep tech, so some things can take a little bit of time to come to fruition. We just met a pretty good milestone, which means we can proceed on some plans that we had, but I think the biggest thing that's kind of changed is the investment landscape, the venture capital landscape. So back in March, just when the pandemic was beginning, we were invited by the Crown Prince of Bahrain to go there for an investment conference, but that got cancelled, and we had another interesting thing in the Middle East, the which got delayed, which is now being re-released in September. So hopefully I'm allowed to leave the country. But that's the UAE Food Tech Challenge. So that's 12 startups are in that, and there's $1 million in prizes for pitching. So I think the big thing with this pandemic that kind of held us up was being able to travel freely, to go to some to meet some investment opportunity. Yeah, and other than that, I'm just kind of stuck down here in cold Melbourne, and waiting to kind of get out of Melbourne and go visit some other opportunities overseas, because I think because Australia is so self-sufficient in food, we take it for granted, but the venture capital, especially in the Middle East, has really been brought forward for food security, and to an extent to China as well, with their African swine fever, wiping out 3/4 of their pigs, their pig stock, and then now they've just seen another swine flu, I think, in some pigs out in China. So that brings some more challenges moving forward. The last thing we need is another pandemic on top of another pandemic.
So what were you doing, Tim, before you got into this venture?
So yeah, scaling back, I guess I did a lot of things. I've had something like 60 jobs in 6 countries. I've had the luxury of traveling a lot, which is why I'm glad I'm on your show, because it has that travel aspect to it. So yeah, going back 2015, yeah, I was backpacking from Cairo to Cape Town, and that's when I guess I had what would you call a quarter life crisis. I was turning 30 and didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just traveled pretty much. And yeah, 2 years after that, after coming back from South Africa, I flew out to Brisbane, and then 100 k's west of Brisbane is Gatton, and I started my master's in Agri-Business, which is where I found that algae just solves many problems, and I partnered with some experts at UQ. So one of our co-founders is a professor at the Algae Biotechnology Lab, and another guy just started his PhD. So that's kind of it in a nutshell where we started. I guess that was 2018, and yeah, we're now 2 years later.
So have you always been interested in the agri-business? What got you into that? Was there a epiphany in life, as to say, or was there somebody that was a role model?
Well, I think the epiphany is in my name. So Tim Gardner. I think I was just born. I think I was just born to do it. I think I was just born to tend to a garden, and that's actually how this project kind of started. I was looking after the community garden out at the Gatton UQ campus, and we'd get down and attract a range of students from overseas, and yeah, that's where we made some friends and shared some ambitions, and that's where we're at. So I think I guess it goes, if your name is Smith, you're going to be a blacksmith, and or if your name's Gardner, you got to be growing something, and it just looks like algae.
There you go. There you go. Now, how many people are involved in this project that you're working on at the moment? How big's the team?
So we've got 3 co-founders, and it's been interesting during this pandemic because I got slammed actually with job applications. So in the space of like 2 weeks, I had half a dozen applications. I just had another one yesterday. So I've managed to recruit another guy. He's a recent graduate from UNSW, studied agriculture and food. So it's a good fit. But I guess when you get slammed by job applications and people wanting to help out and work for you because you share a common mission, I guess that recruitment process and how you go about nurturing that. And actually, there was another guy in the US that got involved too. He was a recent graduate interested in protein. But one particular tool that might be of interest to your listeners, which I used, because everyone went to video conferencing, Zoom became a big thing, and there's one little tool. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, Loom.
Mm-hmm.
Loom, basically, it's a screen share recording, but you can put your superimpose your face in the corner, so you can send little messages to each other, and you can send it via email, and it comes up with a nice GIF, and there's your face, and people click on it and watch the video. But as a recruitment tool, I think face to face is really important, and failing that, video to video is just as good. So yeah, if you get people interested working for you, and that's the whole point about recruitment, isn't it? You'll have a resume, you send it to a potential employer, and they look at it thinking if they want to see you or not, but really they want to see you. So you can cut out that whole resume middleman part if you just shoot videos to each other.
Mm. Has that something that you've been developing for a while, or has that come about because of COVID-19?
Yeah, this came about from COVID-19. Yeah, so about March, April. I got slammed with all these job applications, and I thought, well, how can I nurture these the best I can? And the best way to do it is through video, because you just get that human connection.
So given the landscape we're in today, excuse the pun, what does a business do like yours where you've got all these people that are applying for positions, and yet you've got the situation going on in the world as we do with the business? Have you got the business model on hold at the moment, on pause, or what's actually going on?
Yeah, it's kind of been in hibernation, kind of on pause. One thing about algae too, especially there's been a bit of research with spirulina, how it increases, how it's good for your immunity, and that's one of the best defenses against a virus is having a good immune system. I guess a few things got delayed, but we've only just reached this milestone with the product, so now it's kind of ready for market. So this was only the last week or so. So we were kind of almost ready when COVID hit, and now we are, and now things are opening back up again. With any luck, they stay open, especially down here in Melbourne. Yeah, I guess we're probably a couple of weeks away from launching officially.
So in some ways, this timeline has been rather beneficial because it's allowed you to focus on getting everything completed and ready to go. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think it's worked into our favour, and they say, well, historically some great companies are born out of downturns, out of recessions, and it'd be really nice to be one of them.
I'd add podcasts into that as well.
Yes, I'd like to. This might be interesting for your listeners as well as yourself. There's an app. It's in beta. You might be able to get a demo of it, but it's called podseeker.co, and it's basically a directory of podcasts. So you can search by topic, and then I guess the spiders crawl its data, and you can make lists of podcasts, and then export it to an Excel sheet, and you'll get the contact details, and you can email a bunch of podcasts to potentially be a guest on.
Fantastic. There's a lot of amazing innovation going on throughout this period. Is there anything that's been happening with your project that has come about as a result of this period that you may have not had in the pipeline before COVID-19?
I think the big thing which has helped a lot is people have now become more comfortable on video, so doing Zoom conferences and the like. And I think that's really going to open up attendance to a range of conferences to a range of people. I heard an example on another podcast about a Microsoft uh, um, conference, and they would traditionally hold it in a hotel. You know, maybe they get 5,000 people attend, but because they've had to shift virtually, they had 300,000 people attend. So to be able to open up attendance, I think this is going to be a great thing post COVID, um, to have a much wider audience potentially listening in.
Yeah, I think so as well, and I think we're seeing, as a result of some of the things that you've talked about, whether it be Zoom calls and all these other things that are getting online as a result of COVID-19, it's developed new audiences across the world in all sorts of different sectors. That's for sure. During this period, I'm interested to know, what has this period taught you as a business person? So the way that you looked at a business and ran a business before COVID-19 versus, being in amongst it today. What are some of the lessons that you've learned?
It's very important to be present, whether that's in person or via video. And your presence, this is coming on to a personal individual level, your presence is kind of determined by your routines. And I rely quite heavily on lifting heavy things for my zen, for my I guess, well, they call it barbell medicine. I really like working out, and that's something that got taken away for the last 3 months. So I think it's important to have good routines and be healthy, because that manifests into business, and how confident you are in meetings, and getting on the phone and talking to, possibly cold calling and whatnot, or talking on a podcast. So I think what this pandemic has taught me is, geez, I need that barbell medicine, and it really makes a big difference. The gym's only just opened up last week, and as per normal, when I'm back in training, I usually hit it too hard, so I'm in a bit of pain today, but it's a good pain, and that makes me carry myself more positively. I think I'm talking to you in a more confident manner that I'd normally talk over the last 3 months. It's been a little bit depressing, and I think routines are just so important for business, and that's also what I think builds on culture too, because I think the number one competitive advantage in any business is culture, and how you navigate that through any time, if it's a pandemic and people are a bit scared and worried, you really got to show a bit of leadership to carry people through, and it's trying time, but we'll make it through. We've got a great culture in Australia. It's been interesting seeing the cultural response to the pandemic. We tend to follow the rules in Australia, which has been great. Which is, I think, why we've kept the cases relatively low compared to some other countries. So my biggest learnings during this pandemic is, keep your routines up, because that'll affect your ability to guide culture and leadership through trying times.
Now, you're in startup phase and you're in the agri-business world. I was going to ask you, is it a close-knit community? Do you have a lot of people within the inner circle that are supporting each other through these times based on the things that you just talked about then? Is there a lot of people putting their hands out and offering support?
It is quite close-knit in Australia, but there's such a disconnect between cities and rural areas, especially farmers. And it depends what vertical you're in with ag tech, whether it's AI or machine learning or robotics or sensors. Um, it, it it's very fragmented, but it's still relatively close together. Before the pandemic hit, we were exhibiting at Evoke Ag down here in Melbourne, which is an annual conference which brings together all the players in the ag tech scene, from venture capital to startups like us. Um, so it is a very supportive community. Rural people, what I learnt living out west of Brisbane, rural people tend to be a lot more supportive, and I found that through my travels. The people in the remote areas are usually the most hospitable compared to city people, and there's a big disconnect between the two, and it's kind of hard to cross that bridge a little bit too.
Mm. Now, talking about being in Australia, has the Australian government done anything to aid your business activities during these times?
Yes, so Austrade have been very good. We'll have a meeting with Austrade Middle East next week. Um, they caught up on the news with our being a finalist in the UAE Food Tech Challenge, and Trade Invest Queensland. They've been very helpful. They put us in touch with some people on the ground in China, and as well as Hong Kong and Singapore. Definitely the trade bodies have been super helpful. They open a lot of doors. The other government incentives, it, it kind of depends where you're at. Startups really got left out of JobKeeper, especially if they were pre-revenue. So yeah, there hasn't been too much support from the government for startups per se. It just depends which level of government, whether it's federal, state, or local. But definitely the New South Wales Treasury, they gave us a shout out the other day. So there is support, but it's more so you got to be on their radar to kind of demand that support.
Mm. Let's rip out the crystal ball for a minute, and if the world turns back to something like normal, where do you expect this project to be in 2 to 3 years from now?
Well, we want to be growing in Queensland, where we've got that clean green reputation in Australia, and southeast Queensland in particular is that Goldilocks zone to be growing microalgae. And we set up a subsidiary in Hong Kong. So ideally we're into China. I laid a little bit of groundwork there last year. Had some fantastic meetings, and then now the Middle East has popped up potentially too. So it'd be great if we could be growing in Queensland and exporting to China or other regions in Asia. India is struggling too a little bit with food security, especially water security, and the Middle East.
Mm. So what are some of the big challenges that you're confronted with at the moment, besides the inability to be able to travel to a lot of these places at the moment? What are some of the other hurdles that you're confronted with?
Government regulation. So it's interesting with this particular strain of algae, Nanochloropsis. So the Department of DPI, Department of Industry and Agriculture, you're allowed to import this stuff from overseas. You're allowed to export it, but for ZANS, the Food Standards Australia New Zealand, it's still a little bit of a grey area. I think in recent years, I think with regulation and for ZANS, especially the food industry, they've probably been slammed with a lot of innovation, a lot of different ingredients people want to use, a lot of different processes, and I think it's typical, isn't it? Government regulation tends to hold things up, but they're there for a reason, and that's to keep people safe with food.
Yeah, understandable. So So, other than that, is there anything else that, as a result of COVID-19, you're going to have to change about the business model to get this to where you want it to go?
I think online channels, e-commerce, has really taken off. Australia's a little bit behind with e-commerce and people buying typical grocery items online compared to some other places. China's really ahead of the game with online shopping, and I think added with video as well. So in China, I think I listened to your last podcast. It was about influencers. In China, they call them KOLs, and a KOL stands for Key Opinion Leader. And that model in China, they'll have a live stream, which is basically an infomercial, really, and then use that channel for e-commerce. And I think that model is going to start being rolled out by Facebook pretty soon. So you can do live streams and then be selling products while you're doing a live stream.
Okay.
So I see that coming in on the horizon, and I see people being more comfortable buying things after watching a live stream. I think Australia will be a little bit behind in that particular aspect, but it'll come to us eventually because I guess Facebook is really pushing it because they want to push their Facebook payment Libra as well, and so they're probably going to roll that out globally.
Do you think the startup landscape in Australia is going to be vastly different after we start to come out of this? Do you think there's going to be less people wanting to take the risk in a startup environment?
Well, most of the jobs come from startups. I think there's going to be more people applying to startups and maybe see that as a viable channel for their future of work. It's also going to open up the job landscape globally. Companies are going to realize, well, if people are working from home, we don't need these expensive offices anymore, and people can work from home. And then they'll realize, well, maybe we don't need Australians to be working these jobs and paying Australian wages, and we could outsource to a global marketplace to get the same job done for cheaper. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a bumpy transition, and I think it's going to be a lot of those middle tier jobs that are going to get outsourced, which it's globalization. You can't really stop it, I don't think.
Is there going to be an opportunity for your project to actually head off overseas? Is Australia the best environment for your project?
Growing in Australia is, but yeah, last year, for example, I didn't stay in the one spot longer than a month. I was in Hong Kong, Thailand, China, in between Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane a lot. So I think me personally, I'm still going to be moving around once the travel restrictions are open. Australia is a good spot, especially for food and food tech, because we really are innovators in the space. But if I need to be somewhere on the ground somewhere else and being present, then I've got to go where I've got to go. But operationally, we'll always keep that in Queensland.
So what are your projections as to when you can start getting overseas again?
Well, September is the Food Tech Challenge, and I'd really like to get to that. That's in Abu Dhabi. I don't think we're allowed to leave the country until next year, unless we've got an exemption. I'm hoping I can get an exemption to travel. We've got a really good excuse. We're an Australian company, looking to win a share of $1 million. So we've got a great excuse to leave the country. It just depends if we're allowed to. I'm pretty sure we can, because Australia has met this pandemic challenge quite well. I think we're fairly welcome in a lot of other countries to travel. The latest update from the UAE that I had was you've got to do a test on arrival, and you're allowed to pass through as soon as that comes back negative.
Okay, that's good. Let's see how things progress. Is there a plan B if you're not allowed to travel out of the country for the rest of the year? What are you going to do?
Just rely on the abundance of video conferencing tools we've got now, whether that's Zoom, Loom, Microsoft Teams, Google. There's a lot of options there to beam in virtually.
Okay, brilliant. Now, last question for today, Tim. What pieces of advice would you give somebody sitting around the world currently today who's having a little bit of a trouble with their business through these rocky times? What would be some of your advice you'd lend out to them?
Ask for help. Simple. It's such a simple thing, but it's really hard to actually reach out and ask for help. And you've got to have that board of advisors, those mentors to seek out and ask help from. It can be a really lonely pursuit, entrepreneurialism, but there's always someone that's done something similar to you, and send them an email or a Facebook or a tweet. Just reach out. Don't be shy, because most people are actually really happy to help. It's really surprising how people are really happy to help.
That's a really good piece of advice, and it's one that's becoming a standard theme from all my guests. They're talking about making sure that you've got good people around you and you've got a good mentorship process in place as well. Tim Gardner, it's been great having you on the Global Business Podcast today. Thanks very much for joining me. We've all learnt a lot from what you're doing, and good luck with your amazing agribusiness. It sounds like it's something that NASA needs to take up to the International Space Station as a scientific project or something.
Well, that's how Spirulina came to be. It was a NASA-funded project to feed astronauts.
Ah, there you go. So, well, maybe it's not too crazy an idea after all.
Exactly. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Okay, bye for now.
Cheers. Bye.
That was Tim Gardner talking to me from cold but sunny Melbourne in Australia, and talking to us about a startup company that he's involved in bringing a new stream of algae into our food supply. A fantastic innovative product there, Tim, and thanks very much for joining me on the show. If you'd like to be a guest on the Global Business Podcast, all you have to do is reach out via our Facebook page and get in contact with me, and we'll have a conversation about you coming on the show. We're all about trying to share current business strategies in these volatile times and hoping that we can all learn from each other. If you like a little bit of travel, then head over to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. You can check out over 150 episodes I've done there with amazing guests from all over the world talking about their incredible travel experiences, how it's changed them and how it's changed their view on the world. So plenty of podcasts for you to listen to, and I look forward to being back here again really soon on the Global Business Podcast show to bring you another episode. In the meantime, my name's Mark Philpott. Stay well, stay safe, and let's get this world running again, people. Bye for now.